Today's speaker is Esther Valdez, Clayton. She's principal attorney at Valdez and Associates. She's a graduate of University of California, Berkeley, with her undergraduate and Juris Doctorate degree. For the last 20 years, she's been helping people across the country with immigration needs. She's regularly featured on various news media outlets such as NBC News, BBC World, Telemundo, the Spanish-speaking television world. And she also was on Coronado School District Board as trustee from 2016 to 2022. She currently resides in Coronado, and she has done so since 2012 here with her husband. So please welcome to the Coronado Roundtable, Esther Valdez.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege and an honor to talk about something that I love. Not immigration, this is about America. I love America. I'm a first-generation American. My parents came here. I'm the daughter of a pastor, Southern Baptist pastor. We lived over by San Ysidro in Section 8 housing. And we came in during the Reagan administration. It was a time of patriotism, it was a time of duty, of honor, and I was taught to love this country. And I emphatically, unabashedly, unashamedly love this country. And when I talk about immigration, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about fighting for our country, domestically, about our country's interests, our national interests, and about the threats that are currently facing right now as a country because of what's happening at the border. But also balancing it, can everybody hear me? Also balancing it with reality, where we are with demographics, where we are with labor, where we are with an aging a baby boomer population, and the need for younger labor. What that means for our ideological discussions, what that means for future generations of America and democracy. I know it's maybe a lot of you came in because of the numbers that we're seeing at the San Diego border. Currently, we're at the #1 sector for migrant apprehensions right now because of the volume. Right now, under the Biden administration, we've had 8 million migrant apprehensions with 1.2 million gotaways. What does that all mean to the future of our nation? And that's really what we need to focus on. It's not just like this myopic type of conversation. And depending on the various groups, some people really like to talk about the humanitarian aspect. And that's great, we can talk about that. Helping people, recent newcomers coming to America, and giving them water bottles, blankets, and necessities. That's one aspect. The other aspect, which we'll also talk about, is the racial aspect. What does that mean? That there's racial tensions across our nation because of recent arrivals from more than 70 different countries. The different ideologies that are coming in, where this country is a Western civilization. What does that mean if you have an influx of people with ideologies? And I deal with it as an immigration attorney, that a female is a substandard human, or they practice female genital mutilation, or females don't have the same rights, or girls are free game to be a bride and to be able to be wed. That's what we're really dealing with when we talk about immigration. And first and foremost, as I was taught, I'm a graduate of UC Berkeley, and even then, they taught immigration policy has to benefit the interests of the nation itself. And that can be economic. We do know that 1/3 of the national industries here in the United States under the Department of Labor are dominated by immigrant labor. That's a reality, that's a fact, that's something we can't escape. Otherwise, we would be facing an economic situation very similar to what the European Union is, where they have unionized workers that demand 1 month of vacation. Rarely does a Mexican laborer in Carlsbad or Fallbrook get 1 month paid vacation. They do not. They're lucky if they get a rest break, a meal break, or if they get paid a minimum wage at times. That's the reality of what we get when we buy our groceries at Boney's over here or at Vons. Somebody picked it because they were getting paid under the table. And it usually is somebody who looks like me, somebody who is of Mexican or Latin American descent that is getting exploited, frankly. A lot of it has to do with economics, but the other part of it is demographics. Since 1973, the United States and the legalization of Roe v. Wade has had 65 million abortions, meaning that's 65 million Americans that were never born. 65 million Americans that have been doctors, workers, construction workers. And because of that, just recently, just yesterday, the Wall Street Journal posted that the only population gains that America has had in the past couple of years has been in the Hispanic community. 65 million Hispanics are now in this country. So basically, if you were a Democrat today, you have to realize that the abortion rights also go hand in hand with more immigration. You have to have both. If you are for immigration, you have to have volumes of poor people coming in to be able to fill the immigration labor pool gap that's created because of the native born abortion rates. You have to have it. But also, as Republicans, we need to also face the fact that because of the demise of our own population, the aging population, we need newer, younger workers, and that's what the Wall Street Journal got right in that article, because immigrant labor does revitalize communities. It's revitalizing rural economies. If you go to certain areas here in San Diego, you look at certain Roman Catholic churches and evangelical churches. In the morning are the English-speaking congregation, and in the afternoon comes in the Spanish congregation, also strong people of faith. 93% profess a Christian faith. Also with their little ones, their young ones, and they go to the park afterwards and have carne asada. That's what's happening in communities, not just our border community here in San Diego, but throughout the nation. It's revitalizing industry, revitalizing rural economy. But not just that, but 3 weeks ago, I was at Camp Pendleton, and 16% of our currently enlisted men and women are of Hispanic origin. That's what it means. They're young men and women who were taught to love this country, who were taught to serve this country, and will defend our national interests here domestically and abroad, because they are young, because they're of a fighting age, and that's what where we stand to win. That's really the crux of what we need to focus on, is how America moves forward. How many of you watched the debate yesterday? Most of everybody, right? I think there were some very salient points as to what the national conversation has become about immigration. On one side, it's become very emotional, it's become very political, and as an immigration attorney for the past 22 years, I stand in the sidelines. I have talked to countless immigrants, including my entire family, cousins that I've immigrated, my mom and dad that I helped prepare for their naturalization exam. This is something that's very near and dear to me, but emotions aside, we have to look at this logically and as well as with a great perspective. And I apologize for being 20 minutes late. I was taping a news program called Politically Speaking. It will air, hopefully, if they don't block it, on NBC this Sunday. Sometimes, and I say that because I have taped with local news affiliates and they block the conversation, because it's something that is very difficult to hear at times, that not necessarily the station managers or the reporters want to hear about crime. And we've heard a lot of the crime that's been happening right now. Most recently, just yesterday, a 22-year-old Turkish man who entered through the San Diego border right here, 15 miles from here. He entered here and he went on to rape a 15-year-old girl in New York. And I talk about that not as an immigration attorney, not as a Republican, not as a political pundit. I talk about that as a woman. I think as a woman, that's one of our worst fears, and something that most men will never experience. That fear of being tied down, being detained like Jocelyn Nungarai, the 12-year-old that was strangled and raped by multiple men who had just entered the United States, exploiting our asylum system. And that is not fear-mongering. That is not anti-migrant. That really what needs to happen is we need to detain more men. We know more single men are coming in now more than ever, and I see them in my office. They're young, they're strapping, and they're not claiming to be women. They're not woke. They're not wearing dresses. They've eaten all their life non-GMO food, no plasticizers. These boys are looking for women. Wouldn't you think back when you were 25, 26? You wanted somebody to love. And that's what these men are going to do. And they want families, they want to live their lives here honorably in the United States. But this is also a national security risk when we let out over 60% of the migrant apprehensions are single males. This is something completely different for those of us who were born and raised here in San Diego. My family came here, my mom, dad, my 3 older sisters were all born in Mexico. I was the only one born here. Because they lacked their legal papers, we went back to Mexico for 6 years so they could all legalize and enter legally here in the United States. They had a visa, work visa for my dad to work here as a pastor, but that wasn't enough to allow them to live here. So once we finally came here, it was different. Life is different here in America, economically, ideologically. The population was different at the time. How many of you remember what San Diego looked like back in the 80s? Oh, good, great. Do you remember over crossing the bridge? There was a vital, revitalized African-American community here in San Diego. There used to be city council members that were African-American here. 12% of our population used to be a Black population. That's all changed through immigration. A lot of those communities now are Hispanic dominant through immigration, but also through births, as attested by the Wall Street Journal article. And that's what we need to look at. When we look at demographics right now, Hispanics overtook the African American population in just 40 years through births. Whereas the African American population has been in the United States since its inception, since 1619. In 40 years of unfettered, unmitigated immigration and through births, the average Latina woman has 3.2 children. Her counterpart, her white counterpart, has less than 2 children. Demographically, we're looking at expanding, growing Hispanic populations. That means younger workers. It was not a coincidence that Barack Obama in 2012, he started the Deferred Action Childhood Arrivals Program. How many of you have heard of DACA before? Great. So it gave work permits to all the young people, not the older people, just the young people, not the old ones that had already been here, just the young ones. Why? Because they pay taxes, they pay into Social Security, they pay into a lot of social programs. And yes, they all have to pay taxes, and you have to report that every 2 years to make sure that they're working and they're laboring as well. That gave work permits for almost 2 million DACA recipients. As the years went by, now it's close to only 800,000 because a lot of them have become legal through getting married through US citizens. But the new program with executive action that Biden just announced, it will also mostly benefit younger immigrants who have married US citizens as well. It gives them work permits, the ability to stay here. I am positive the US government sees the numbers as I do. They see we need a younger population to be able to support the aging population. We need younger workers here to be able to hold on to 1/3 of the industries: agriculture, manufacturing, hotel, furniture manufacturing. If you go to restaurants here in Coronado, go in the kitchen, look at your server. They're probably from Mexico or Guatemala as well. The house cleaners, the landscapers as well, they're Latino. And that holds true for most of San Diego County, and I've practiced in 7 states. That's pretty much true in a lot of communities that aren't even border communities anymore. That's the reality of what it takes to run America and enjoy the freedoms and the cheap food and the services that we have. So it's a fine balance, and the US government acknowledges that every time they propose what a lot of people call a soft amnesty or an allowance. It's mostly only just for work permits, curiously enough, to allow that person to continue to work, provide services to the United States, pay taxes, but they can never leave. They can never vote. They can never enlist, and there's no pathway for residency. And what it does, it really creates this second-class type of citizenry where, wow, I can work here, but I can never vote here. I can't ever become a resident because there's no clear pathway for that. That belongs, it's the purview, the exclusive purview of Congress. It demands legislative action. And if you walk away with something today is that the whole solution for immigration has to be something where 435, 2/3 of the 435 members in Congress understand what we need. Number one, as my husband was saying in the car, it is the sole domain and the main interest of the national government to secure our border and to have peace and calm and maintain peace in a nation. You cannot have a nation if there is chaos, if there is violence, and that's why most of the immigrants come here to the United States. If you watch the interview that I taped, if they air it at all, my opponent was talking about from a very compassionate humanitarian, and usually these are the conversations I have with people, you know, they're kind, they're well-meaning, I just want to help migrants, I just love immigrants, and I do too, they're half my family, it's my mom and dad, I do too. You know, but that's just very myopic. The other side of it, well, what do we do with our national security? And the gentleman here, I wanted to hear, I hope they take your conversation. What do we do with the thousands of Chinese that are currently coming here? Are they all just coming here to just enjoy more economic freedom? Or are some of them here testing, looking out, looking for an opportunity here? Does that pose a threat for our national security? I believe it does. I believe it's not a coincidence that most of them are single males. They're not coming in family units. And they freely tell you, I didn't come here for asylum, I came here to work. And that's sadly the truth. I don't know if they're going to air this, but my opponent was saying, oh, they're just kind people looking for jobs. What's wrong with that? Their conditions in their countries of origin were so bad. That's why they had to leave, and that's why they come here. Well, the statistics tell us, and I know this is what I practiced for 22 years in court, only 14% win asylum. So the rest are not asylum seekers. They can claim to be asylum seekers, that's their right. But the rest are economic migrants, and they do tell you this, whether they're from China, Uzbekistan, Mexico, Central America, Guatemala. They end up losing in court. And after you lose in court, it takes 5 to 9 years to lose in court. And after that, by then you have a couple of children, you have a spouse, you have a job, you have a home. Some of them own businesses too. They do not want to go back home. And that's the difficulty because there is no deportation enforcement. The deportations we've seen with Joe Biden are higher than under Trump, but because they're catching more people, so they're called expedited removals. When you get them and you grab them and you fly them out. But most of them that are coming here, they get to stay on what's called parole. It is executive domain. That means the exclusive power of the president to be able to grant parole authority, meaning I give you permission to enter the United States with a specific permission and a specific purpose that's tied to a humanitarian cause. And that's what the President Biden has done for millions of people. They allow them to come in, they ask for asylum, the case takes 5 to 8 years to move forward. And then I know, because these statistics are published under the Congressional Committee on Immigration, the House Oversight Committee, the Executive Office of Immigration Review, and I keep repeating this, most people don't want to hear this, but again, only 15% will win asylum cases. And by country, it's even worse. Only 4% win when they ask for asylum from Mexico. From Guatemala, it's 8%. From El Salvador, 14%. They're very low statistics, so that tells us many things. Most, number one, migrants already know they don't have a valid case. I know because I screened them. I'm like, I'm sorry, why did you come here? Do you have any evidence? Because the evidence in court that you have to present, whether USCIS or in court, you have to present 2 things. It's very easy. And that's why it's appalling that a lot of these asylum officers or the Border Patrol or the government officials there can't screen people fast enough because A, they don't want to, and also because it's the policy not to screen them to win an asylum case. You have to ask, have you suffered torture, persecution, or harm in your country of origin? And the nexus requirement is that the government caused it or their government inaction caused it in some way on the basis of 5 protected grounds. Not having a job is not a protected ground. Not being poor is not a protected ground. Race, religion, national origin, political opinion, or a particular social group. Those are the grounds. So for example, if I am a Mexican family and my husband was enlisted in the Mexican army and he refused to transport heroin for the local cartel and he reports it, and then they end up killing and murdering 2 of his children and raping his daughter, that's Mexican, that's asylum. That means that there was government action and coercion that caused or perpetrated the torture and persecution of a person on account of a political opinion. It meets all 3 elements, and case after case has to be able to present that. But most, because of the COVID closures, have suffered great and grievous economic harm in their countries of origin, like Guatemala, Venezuela, Cuba. They're coming here because their economies never recovered after COVID. So now they're coming in because they need jobs, they need to feed their little ones. But what I like to point out is that if you send the men out of any country, you leave the most vulnerable women and children behind to fend for themselves the very fear that you escaped from. So it's illogical to me when I scream men, I'm like, hold on, you came running over here from that house that was burning, but you left the women and children behind? How real is that threat? How real is that harm? It really calls into question the credibility of their claim, as well, especially that most of them don't bring any evidence whatsoever. And again, these are statistical evidence that is published freely on the congressional reports. We know this. So really the gain of the whole asylum loophole system is the time that you get to be here in America and the hope that there is an administration that is very lax, that is very free, that overwhelms the immigration court system so that your case runs for 6 to 7 to even 9 years. I've had asylum cases go on for 9 years. I'm closing one right now that started in 2012. And I'm gonna have to go to New Orleans to finish it because of course the migrant that originally entered here through San Diego ends up moving to Tennessee. So I have to follow the case wherever it is. So that's a very real reality. And the greater win is the work permit that you get during that period of time as well. And of course, you know, wherever this person goes, the hope is that they win, and we will win because I've won the cases for the rest of her family, 11 Mexicans who came here fleeing. That anecdote that I told you about the Mexican family with the 2 murdered soldiers, that was published on the Union Tribune. A Mexican family won their entire asylum case with only 3% chance of prevailing. And it made headline news because it's so difficult to win, and it's so difficult to prove that there is such a thing as a Mexican asylum case, because when we think of Mexico, we think, well, my granddaughter goes to surf down there and I go down there all the time and I was just in Cancun and nothing happens. Well, it didn't happen because someone didn't allow it to happen. You actually escaped really well. All of those resorts are controlled by cartels. They are controlled by industries. They are surveyed, they are watched, and when they see something of interest, just like the Orange County DA who was murdered last year as he was down there. He was celebrating his anniversary with his wife, and overnight he was found murdered. He had been thrown from the balcony from his hotel, his 4-story hotel. The autopsy shows that he had been dragged. All of his fingers had been mashed up in his hands. His wife never found out what happened. But earlier on in the day, they had been stopped by Mexican police who had asked him for a bribe. And he had shown his badge saying, don't mess with me, I'm a federal worker in the United States. I'm an attorney. I'm not gonna pay your bribe. The next night he was thrown overboard. And that happens routinely. I know because I hear it. I know because Mexicans are coming to my office asking, I don't wanna be down there. I'm a prosecutor. I'm an attorney. I'm a police officer. I'm a teacher. I had a hamburger stand and I cannot operate unless I pay a plaza, which means a small bribe, a small amount, whether you're trafficked with, whether you're transporting avocados, flowers to the United States, you gotta pay. Everybody's gotta pay. And I believe the new Mexican government also, the new Mexican president, the female that won, also paid to stay alive. Because the last elections in Mexico were the bloodiest that had ever been seen, with 36 candidates for various political offices being killed as well. It's, we'll see what happens, but a lot of what we've seen happening right now with the border numbers are increasingly going down. For the fourth straight month, they are coming down. And it's not just because of Biden's policies, it's also because the Mexican government has stepped up with the soldiers watching their the border with Guatemala, not allowing the migrants to come in and pushing them back and rerouting them so that they cannot enter their country, which is really because they're feeling the effects of unfettered migration in Mexico. Not only that, but there's a lot of racism and discrimination in Mexico as well against Guatemalans and Central Americans and Venezuelans. They mistreat them horribly as well. And that's a large reason why a lot of them don't want to stay in Mexico. They're like, I'm scared of staying in Mexico. I prefer to be in America. And that's why but we have seen the border numbers come down. And where that takes us right now is back to the debate, back to last night. We saw President Biden when they asked him about the border. Well, actually, I think the most alarming question for me was when they were talking about the abortion rights. Going back to what I was talking about, how immigration is necessarily tied to abortion. It was so telling in his response because he understood, well, maybe intuitively, that both are hand in hand. When he responded about, President Trump was responding to abortion rights and whether he would just negate them altogether or make it a constitutional right for women to access abortion. And President Biden said, well, you know, the 12-year-old that was murdered in Texas by 2 migrants, that was migrant crime, but there's also women who are raped, and this is a quote, I'm not mistaken when I use this language, they're also raped by their uncles and aunts. Like, it was illogical, but I think he was just stumbling through his words at that point. But he was basically making the point that, yes, there is illegal crime, but it also, as long as it already happens here, it's not a big deal for me. He was almost poo-pooing the deaths. The Maryland mom who was out jogging that was also killed by a man who had just entered the United States. There was another Colorado man who was driving and who was also killed by a recent arrival. And the reason why that matters is not to highlight anybody's crime, but to highlight that the federal government is responsible for keeping us safe, and they're not doing it. We have government inaction here. As a woman, I don't want to feel threatened. I moved to Coronado in 2012 as a single mom because I didn't want to live with my daughter alone in where I was raised. I wanted to feel safe. I already owned a gun because I had to, because her father left us when I was 4 months pregnant. So I didn't have a choice. I looked on the map, I started praying, and I said, God, I want to feel safe. I want my daughter to be able to walk home safely. I want her to be able to stay at home while I'm at work, that nobody's going to bother my daughter. And God made it possible for us to be able to move in the safest area that I could afford, which was Coronado. And I thank God for that. I've been here for 2012. But that's a real danger for women. And it's not, again, it's not to highlight anti-migrant rhetoric. I feel like they use that to shut down the conversation, but it is a real threat. But the greater threat is national security. And again, I want to hear your talk on the China and the Chinese industry, because everything that goes on with immigration, especially here locally in San Diego, our local leaders tend to just want to appease and calm their various factions of their various political parties, whether sounding very extreme, very harsh, or whether sounding very humanitarian and understanding, let's just send them all in, we just want to feed them, clothe them, it's their human right to be able to come to America. But if we keep allowing all the single men from any one country to continue to come, we stop an American revolution from happening in their country of origin. And the changes that need to happen in El Salvador, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Venezuela never happen because the young men who would have fought for that social change are already over here. Imagine if the American Revolution, instead of fighting the British, the men at that time had said, oh, wow, this is really hard. Let's just leave. Let's just get up and leave. We're not gonna fight them. No, they knew at some point they had to stand their ground and they had to fight. And it was the men fighting with the women supporting and some of them even fighting as well. But also the French Revolution. Any revolution, sociologists tell us, it's done by the elites of the country. And the young men coming here usually are the more affluent because they can afford the smugglers. They're not paying $2,000 chump change to come to the United States. The Chinese, and you know this, are paying upwards of $30,000 for elite track A VIP status, complete with a CBP1 app appointment to be at the head of the line to be able to come in. Got designer clothes, same with the Ukrainians as well. Mexicans can't afford it, we can't afford it. But the Venezuelans can. A lot of the people coming from Central America, they're coming from middle-class backgrounds. And again, it never changes the systemic injustices, the misogyny, the extortion, the bribery that goes on in the countries that make those conditions intolerable. The inability to own private property, the inability to transfer private property, the inability to record and hold on to your private property. All of that is what drives people to come over to the United States, because here we still have a lot of freedoms, including religious freedoms as well. So in the upcoming elections, what can we expect to see? As far back as last year, I remember telling most of my clients, I'm like, wait, the election year is next year. And Biden's losing big time with Hispanic voters because we're getting crashed economically. Mexican families, Hispanic families that had attained the highest home ownership, the highest employment rates in 40 years, just saw everything dwindle down. They're losing their jobs. They can't afford it. Inflation's hurting these families a lot. So he's losing a lot of voters, not just with the Black voters, but also Latino voters. And I told my clients, wait till next year. We're going to start our paperwork next year because he's going to announce something. And sure enough, he did. It's not so much as helping the people, because only 527,000 will qualify for the new work permit program for the spouses of U.S. citizens. But more than that, it was an appeal to the Hispanic voters and saying, hold on, I haven't forgotten you, especially the Mexican voters, because Mexican voters are 60%, 64% of the Latino population in the United States. They're saying with outrage, wait a minute, we've been working here in Carlsbad, we've been working in Fallbrook, we've been working in Coronado. I have no documents, no work permit, no papers. My son's in the military, we pay taxes, and I still can't get legalized. And the recent arrivals from Cuba, from Haiti, Colombia, all under the Biden program, they all got work permits. The minute they walked in, within 6 months, they can all apply. And that's a fact. The Ukrainians all have work permits right now. But an average Mexican person that entered here in 2012, 2002, they have no work permits right now. So he's trying to balance various factions because people were saying, wait a minute, we're upset. We're not going to support a second term as well. So I think also on the Republican side, we're going to see Trump make an appeal for these Hispanic voters as well. He's already said that he wants to do mass deportations. Honestly, we don't have the manpower to do that. And without local law enforcement helping, it's an extremely difficult thing to deport just even one person. Here locally, it's called the Enforcement Removal Operation. And they have a unit called Fugitive Ops. And what they do, it takes days of surveillance to be able to watch somebody who has a deportation order. And you don't know if this person is armed, dangerous, or poses a threat to other people there in the house. And they have to get them when they walk out of the house early in the morning just to deport one person. I don't honestly see how we're going to deport 8 million new arrivals. I just don't see that happening. What probably is going to happen is they're going to start prioritizing people with a criminal record or with a criminal history or with arrests should there be a second Trump term. But if not, under Biden, if there is a second Biden administration or Newsom administration or Kamala Harris, we don't know. They might, there's a lot of chatter right now that they might substitute him. We can see, we're probably going to see more migrant arrivals. San Diego's going to continue to be a hot spot right now Curiously enough, all of the policies have had the desired effect of dropping the migrant apprehensions number. But interestingly, those same policies that Biden did, he could have done 3 years ago, but he never did. He could have given work permits 3 years ago, when he never did. He could have gotten into an agreement with his Mexican counterpart 3 years ago, so that we wouldn't have had to be in this situation where San Diego allocates over $30 million. That was a drop in the bucket, that was lost money to be able to house migrants for migrants who were recent arriving into the San Diego, to house them, feed them, clothe them. And then they had to close the center because it wasn't enough. So the street drop-offs are still happening over at Iris Avenue. That's where my dad's church was. So I know the area very well. The street drop-offs never happen in Del Mar, or Coronado even, or Rancho Santa Fe. They happen in the poorest of neighborhoods. And I can tell you from speaking to my clients, they're not happy about it. They fought tooth and nail to own those little homes. They fought tooth and nail to immigrate to the United States and own those homes, and now their communities are dumping grounds. And they feel unsafe too for their little ones and their daughters and their sons, because people are just landing on tents, and they're not all leaving to go to areas like Boston. The Boston Globe last week published an article because even though Boston's renowned for their humanitarian relief that they gave to migrants, they had their own officials fly to the southern border and tell them, don't come. We can't, because of the backlash, because they can no longer afford it. Colorado, a sanctuary city, is now busing them over to Utah. Utah saying, we can't handle it. The Del Rio sector is overwhelmed, and the Texas border areas, even the Democratic Congress members are telling the president, we can't handle it. And that's really when it comes down to economics. Economically, we're at just a tipping point right now, but also demographically as well. And I think politically speaking as well, what happens in this next election is really going to determine whether we will be able to achieve an immigration reform. And it comes down to Congress. No one president can do it. What the president can do is policy. Policy is basically the overall philosophy of how they implement or how they choose to implement a law, whether it's going to be stringent enforcement or lax enforcement. And right now we're in a time of lax enforcement that it's frankly encouraging more and more migrants to come, because they're saying, Biden me va a dar permiso de trabajo, me voy ahorita. They're like, I'm not gonna wait, Biden's gonna give me a work permit right now. You know, that's one of the hugest drivers that the Biden administration needs to recognize as well. But we can do both. We can both enforce the laws and be compassionate and be humanitarian. And my focus is always on helping the 15% of asylum seekers that have valid claims. That has entirely lost relevance for the vast majority of people when we talk about immigration. There are people who need America. We need America to thrive, to shine. And if America ceases to exist, and that's a very possible reality, if we experience what the FBI director, Christopher Wray, has already warned Congress about. Again, I don't know if NBC is gonna air that, frankly, but I like to repeat it because I like to focus on my country, my country's safety, and the future of my country. Director Christopher Wray has already warned Congress that we're looking at a possible 9/11 attack yet again here, and that it would happen through the southern border. Those are his words, not mine. And it goes on and on. Law enforcement, Border Patrol keeps sounding the alarm saying, we can't handle the number. We can't process. We can't vet. We can't screen. It's just thousands every day. Here in San Diego, it's over 1,000 daily. It's an impossible task. Is it by design? I don't know. But once the Border Patrol is telling us that we are being overwhelmed, as a student of history, I can't help but thinking about 406 AD, when the Roman guards were over in the northern regions of the Roman Empire with what was known as the barbarians of their time. And they started warning the Roman elite back in Rome that was enjoying the circus and games and bread for the populace, bread and circus for the populace, started warning them, they're coming. They want to come. They want to come enjoy the freedoms of Rome. And we can't handle them. Our garrisons, our outposts are getting overwhelmed. And the reason why that year was so important is that's precisely when the first migrant caravans started coming into Rome. And the Romans believed we can withstand it. Our empire has been the ruling empire forever. We will be able to withstand it. But as we know, there were migrant waves for over 2 decades, all the way to I believe it was 424, when St. Augustine wrote The City of God. Because so many people were watching their institutions collapsing, and what seemed to be inaction by their elites and their government could no longer protect them. And the beauty of that tome written by St. Augustine was that he was advising them, it's just strengthen, hold on to what remains. Hold on to what is good in your institutions, your community, your relatives, your loved ones. That alone, in the end, will remain. And I don't like to talk as a naysayer. I didn't come here to just give bad news, but also that our hope, and I'm a Christian, my hope is in God, just like St. Augustine said, in the city of God, but also looking at practically everything that I want to secure and protect, it's here on earth. It's here in this nation. It's here in this community. And that's what we're fighting for when we talk about immigration. And it's not just one element or not just one sector. We have to take a look at it in the proper context, in the proper totality, and hope that one day we get a Congress that with 2/3 ratifies meaningful asylum changes, meaningful legalization for the families that are already here that do deserve to be legalized, especially if their children are service members, and to be able to move America forward to a stunning future. So with that, I will open it up to any questions.